Donald Trump said he would win this war in days. It has now been weeks. There is no victory, no resolution. And now, something even more serious is happening because the United States president is being accused of fabricating negotiations to create the illusion of control, while Iran is openly calling those claims false. And at the exact same time, Mark Carney is sending a very different message to the world, a message about power, about alliances, and about what comes next. Donald Trump has been panicking all morning, and as the markets were about to absolutely crash, Donald Trump, in order to manipulate the markets, just came out with a massive lie and claimed that he is in the process of negotiating a deal that could potentially resolve the war with Iran. Donald Trump refuses to say who he's having these discussions with, how they are taking place, what the general framework is, if there are anyone mediating these conversations. Iran instantly has denied that these communications are taking place. They say there's no direct or indirect communications with Donald Trump. When this conflict began, the expectation was clear: a rapid escalation, followed by a rapid declaration of victory. That was the model. That was the assumption, but reality has turned out very differently. Weeks into this conflict, there is no decisive outcome, no clear direction, and no control over how events are unfolding. Instead, what we are seeing is prolonged instability, rising economic pressure, and increasing uncertainty. And that is where the problem begins. In an attempt to regain control of the narrative, Donald Trump made a major and very specific claim. He announced that the United States was engaged in productive and ongoing negotiations with Iran, suggesting meaningful progress was being made toward a resolution. He spoke of structured discussions, constructive engagement, and the possibility of de-escalation within days. On the surface, this was presented as a sign of control, a signal that despite the uncertainty on the ground, there was a diplomatic pathway forward, and that the situation was being managed at the highest level. But that narrative did not hold for long, because almost immediately Iran responded, and the response was not ambiguous or open to interpretation. It was a direct and complete rejection. Iranian officials stated clearly that there were no direct or indirect communications taking place with the United States at all, dismissing the entire claim as false. That kind of contradiction is not minor, it is structural, because in moments of conflict, where information is already fragmented and trust is limited, consistency becomes one of the few anchors of credibility, and when one side makes a detailed claim that is entirely denied by the other, it raises a fundamental question about what is actually happening behind the scenes. This is no longer just about diplomacy, it is about reliability, because if the foundation of the narrative itself is uncertain, then every subsequent claim begins to lose weight, and once that process begins, it becomes increasingly difficult to restore confidence both domestically and internationally. So Iran responds right away. They go on their various state media, and they deny that there have been not just productive conversations, they deny there's any direct or indirect communications whatsoever. Iran says 1. There has been no indirect or direct contact with Trump or his people. 2. Trump is trying to buy time in the Iran war. 3. Trump withdrew from the power plant strike threats after Iran's firm warning that it would strike its neighbors. 4. Trump's comments are part of a psychological warfare campaign against Iran. 5. Hormuz will not return and will never return to pre-war conditions as long as psychological warfare continues. As the Kobayashi letter explains, Iran has entirely denied all of Donald Trump's claims. This was not just a simple disagreement, because the timing of this claim raised even more questions. Markets were under pressure, oil prices were unstable, global uncertainty was rising, and suddenly a statement appears, a statement suggesting progress, stability, and control. According to reports, those claims temporarily stabilized markets that were otherwise heading towards significant disruption, but as more information emerged, the narrative began to collapse, because if the foundation of that claim is not real, then the consequences are far larger than just a political statement. They extend into economics, into global markets, and into trust.
This is where the situation becomes far more serious for Donald Trump, because this is no longer just about the outcome of a war, it is about perception, and more importantly, it is about credibility on the global stage. When a leader makes claims that are directly contradicted by the other side, it creates uncertainty not just among opponents, but among allies, and that matters, because leadership at this level is not just about power, it is about trust, and once that trust begins to erode, it becomes significantly harder to project strength. This is exactly the kind of scenario that Mark Carney had been preparing for from the very beginning. His strategy was built around one core idea: reduce dependence, not just economically, but strategically, because unpredictability in global leadership creates risk, and managing that risk requires diversification. That is why Canada began expanding its trade relationships, strengthening ties with multiple partners, and building alliances beyond a single power center, because situations like this expose a simple reality: dependence becomes vulnerability when leadership becomes unstable. Middle powers have more power than many realize: Europe, Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea. This coalition has a GDP larger than the United States, 3 times the trade flows of China, the largest research and development spend in the world, 62 of the world's top 100 universities, and the largest source of cultural exports globally. If we work together in a variable geometry, in other words, different coalitions for different issues, we can do more than protect our sovereignty. We can build something better, more prosperous, more just than what came before. And then came the message that shifts the entire conversation, a message that was not reactive, not defensive, and not tied to the immediate crisis, but instead focused on the broader structure of global power and where it is heading. Mark Carney spoke about what he described as the growing importance of middle powers, countries like Canada, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, that are often viewed individually but rarely considered as a coordinated force. What he outlined was not just a concept, but a framework, because when these countries are looked at collectively, the scale becomes difficult to ignore. Their combined economic output exceeds that of the United States. Their trade networks span multiple regions and industries. Their investments in research, development, and innovation place them at the forefront of global progress. And beyond the numbers, there is a deeper strategic advantage. These are countries that operate within stable systems, with predictable institutions and long-term policy direction. That stability creates trust, and that trust creates partnerships. Carney's argument was not that these countries should replace existing global powers, but that by working together in flexible coalitions, what he referred to as a variable geometry approach, they can shape outcomes in ways that were previously not possible. This is a fundamentally different model of influence, not based on unilateral dominance, but on coordinated capability, not driven by sudden moves, but by sustained alignment. And in a world where unpredictability is becoming more common, that kind of structure becomes increasingly valuable, because it offers something that traditional power structures are struggling to maintain: consistency. This is where the bigger picture comes into focus, because what we are witnessing is not just a moment, it is a transition, a shift from a world dominated by a single power to a world shaped by coalitions, by networks, by partnerships. And in that world, stability matters more than dominance, consistency matters more than rhetoric, and credibility matters more than projection. On one side, a leader struggling to control a narrative, making claims that are immediately challenged, and trying to maintain the appearance of strength. On the other, a leader preparing for a different kind of world, building alliances, expanding influence, and positioning his country for what comes next. This is no longer just about a war, it is about what kind of leadership defines the future, and increasingly, that answer is becoming clearer.